Michael knelt on the wooden floor, his knees pressing into the cold boards as his lips whispered a prayer he no longer believed in. The dim room felt suffocating, its single candle flickering with strange resistance against the still air. He lowered his head, his voice breaking as he said, "If there is anyone, hear me. I am lost." The flame stretched unnaturally, pulling upward like a string of white silk as the shadows bent in defiance of the light. Michael's chest tightened as a metallic taste filled his mouth, sharp and bitter. The floorboards trembled beneath him, a low vibration crawling into his bones. Suddenly, the candle erupted in a burst of cold white fire, blinding his eyes. He gasped, shielding his face, but through the brilliance a towering figure shimmered, its form shifting with edges of molten silver. The air grew impossibly heavy, yet no wind stirred. Michael's breath caught as a voice thundered within his chest, "You have been seen." The words carved into him like a brand, leaving his soul trembling. Michael sat frozen in the dim silence that followed, his chest pounding as though it might burst. His trembling hand reached toward the extinguished candle, now only a twisted wick. He whispered, "What was that? Was it real?" His words echoed hollow in the room as if no walls remained. Sweat slid down his face, and his thoughts collided like storms. Doubt screamed that it was madness, yet his soul quaked with the weight of the words. The metallic taste lingered, sharp and undeniable. Michael staggered to his feet, gripping the wall for balance. He stumbled toward the window, searching the night sky for comfort, but the heavens only stared back with chilling silence. He muttered, "If that voice is true, then why me?" The darkness outside seemed heavier than ever. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, heart aching, eyes wet, and for the first time in years, he was afraid to be alone. The door creaked, and Sarah stepped in, her presence steady like calm waters against Michael's storm. She found him leaning by the window, hollow eyes wide with dread. "Michael," Sarah said, "your voice carried through the night." He turned sharply, shame painted across his face. "You wouldn't believe what I saw." Sarah moved closer, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "I believe broken souls cry loudest, and heaven listens," she said, with quiet conviction. Michael shook his head, clutching his chest. "It wasn't heaven, it was something terrifying. It saw me." Sarah's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "What you fear may be the very truth that saves you." He turned from her, torn between disbelief and aching hope, and whispered, "I can't bear it if I'm delusional." Her reply was soft yet resolute, "Then let us bear it together." The silence broke as Daniel's voice cut from the doorway, sharp with disdain. "So now you're seeing visions." He leaned against the frame, smirking, his arms crossed in challenge. Michael stiffened, shame prickling his skin. "You don't understand," Michael muttered. Daniel scoffed. "Of course I understand. You're chasing ghosts because you can't face reality." Sarah's eyes flashed as she turned. "Daniel, mockery won't heal him." Daniel stepped inside, pacing like a predator. "Or maybe it's time someone reminds him of reason." Michael's hands curled into fists, trembling. "It wasn't a dream. It was a voice inside me." Daniel's smirk faded, but his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Then prove it," he said coldly. Michael's chest tightened, words lost, torn between despair and desperate belief. A soft shuffle echoed from the hallway, and Grace stepped hesitantly into the room. Her eyes darted between Michael, Sarah, and Daniel, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "I heard shouting," she said, voice fragile. Michael's gaze softened as he saw the weight she carried in her eyes. Daniel rolled his eyes, muttering, "Perfect, another believer in ghosts." Grace lowered her head, whispering, "I've known ghosts of my own, and they don't fade easily." Sarah stepped toward her, hand reaching out in welcome. "Grace, you're safe here." Grace nodded slowly, though guilt clung to her expression. Michael, voice shaking, said, "We've all been marked tonight." Grace met his eyes, tears brimming, and whispered, "Then maybe we'll face it together." The air thickened with the unspoken, each soul carrying its scars into the storm ahead. Michael sat at the edge of the old bed, his hands clutching his temples as if holding his head together. The words, "You have been seen," echoed, rattling his mind like chains. He whispered, "Why me? What did it see in me?" His chest heaved, and guilt pressed down like lead. Images of choices he had buried long ago flickered in memory, each one a wound he thought forgotten. Sarah stood near, her gaze steady, though she did not speak. The silence was unbearable, like a judgment hovering in the air. Michael's voice cracked. "If this is divine, it feels like punishment, not mercy." His body shook with a grief that burned deeper than tears. He pressed his fists against the bed, muttering, "I cannot escape my past." The room seemed to shrink, and shadows crept closer as his soul wrestled in torment. Daniel leaned forward from his chair, eyes sharp with a skeptic's certainty. "Michael, you're drowning in delusion. Voices in your head are not divine, just the echoes of guilt." Michael looked up, face pale, anger flaring beneath his despair. "You didn't feel it," he said. Daniel smirked coldly. "That's because there was nothing to feel." The words struck like blows, each syllable chiseling at Michael's fragile belief. Sarah stepped closer, her voice firm. "Daniel, you blind yourself to anything beyond reason." He laughed harshly, shaking his head. "Reason is the only anchor we have." Michael's chest heaved as his voice cracked. "Then why does my soul ache with truth?" Daniel's expression faltered, but his silence carried more doubt than his mocking words. Sarah knelt in front of Michael, her hand resting over his clenched fists. "Michael, faith is not born from peace, but from storms," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes wet with torment. "If this storm drowns me, what good is faith?" She smiled faintly, though sorrow flickered in her eyes. "Faith was never about your strength. It's about surrender." Michael swallowed hard, staring at her with desperate need for hope. Sarah's voice deepened with conviction. "You cried out, and something answered. That is not madness. That is grace reaching for you." Michael trembled, torn between her words and Daniel's cold logic. He whispered, "But what if I'm too broken?" Sarah's hand squeezed his. "Then brokenness is where mercy begins." As silence stretched, the lantern flickered, casting twisted shadows that crawled across the walls. Michael shivered, his gaze fixed on the shifting darkness. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Daniel glanced dismissively, but Sarah's eyes narrowed. The shadows bent in unnatural patterns, elongating like grasping hands. A chill crept through the room, and the air thickened. Michael's voice dropped to a trembling hush. "It's here. Something is here." Daniel forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. "It's just light tricks." Yet unease flickered in his eyes. The shadows pulsed, stretching toward Michael before dissolving into blackness. His breath caught as dread pressed deeper. Somewhere in the silence, Marcus's unseen presence lingered like a predator waiting for the right moment. The tension thickened until Grace stepped forward from the hallway, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. She clasped her hands together tightly, voice soft but steady. "I've felt it too," she whispered. Michael turned, startled by the honesty in her tone. Sarah gave a small nod, affirming her. Daniel scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "Now it's spreading." Grace lifted her gaze, tears trembling in her eyes. "Some burdens cannot be explained away. They follow us until light breaks them." Michael's chest ached at her words, recognizing his own torment mirrored in her. Sarah said firmly, "Then none of us should bear this alone." Daniel exhaled sharply, but stayed silent. For a moment, they stood bound by fragile trust, shadows lingering just beyond reach. The night deepened, and the room grew colder, though no window was open. Michael wrapped his arms around himself, his breath quickening as the shadows thickened. A whisper brushed his ear, low and venomous. "You are nothing but ruin." His heart slammed against his chest as he turned, but no one stood there. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, sensing the tension, but Michael whispered, "He." Daniel rolled his eyes, masking unease with sarcasm. Of course, the monster in the dark. The lantern flickered violently, and Michael's body trembled as Marcus's unseen presence pressed heavier, an invisible weight suffocating the air. The walls groaned, wood stretching as if under unseen force. Michael's knees buckled, his voice desperate. "Stop haunting me." Silence followed, but the weight lingered, a predator circling unseen prey. The oppressive silence cracked as a radiant glow seeped through the cracks of the room. Michael shielded his eyes as a figure formed in the center, tall and clothed in light that shimmered like dawn over water. Elijah stood among them, his features ethereal yet human, eyes burning with calm fire. Michael fell back, breathless, whispering, "You're real." Daniel's face drained of color, though he muttered, "Tricks, illusions." Sarah bowed her head, her voice trembling with awe. "Messenger." Elijah's words cut through the silence, soft yet resonant. "The storm has purpose. The voice that called you speaks truth, though you doubt." Grace clasped her hands tightly, her tears falling freely. Michael's heart surged with both fear and longing as he stammered, "Why me?" Elijah's gaze pierced him, because brokenness calls the loudest. Daniel's breath came shallow, his eyes locked on Elijah, though he fought to keep composure. This cannot be real," he muttered. His fists tightened at his sides, veins bulging. The glow from Elijah pulsed softly, reflecting in Daniel's trembling eyes. Michael stepped closer to him, voice rising, "You feel it too, don't you? It's not madness." Daniel shook his head violently, but his words faltered. "Light, tricks, delusions, that's all." His voice broke as he stumbled back against the wall. Elijah's gaze rested on him, calm but firm. "Even the strongest walls of denial will crack when truth enters." Daniel's mouth trembled, his silence louder than his mocking words. For the first time, doubt clawed at the skeptic, his certainty trembling on the edge of collapse. The glow softened, and Grace stepped forward into its warmth, her lips quivering. "I can't keep this hidden," she whispered, voice breaking. All eyes turned to her as she clutched her arms tightly. Tears streamed as she confessed, "My hands are stained with things I can never undo." Michael's breath caught at the rawness in her voice. Sarah reached toward her, but Grace stepped back, shaking her head. "I was the reason for someone's downfall. I carry their ruin like a chain around my soul." Daniel's expression hardened, though unease shadowed his face. Michael whispered, "You carry pain like mine." Grace's eyes locked with his, sorrow and hope entwined as she whispered, "If the voice sees me too, then maybe even I can be forgiven." Michael slumped against the wall, his body trembling from the weight of the revelations and visions. His voice rasped, "I don't know if I can carry this. It feels like I'm splitting apart." Sarah crouched beside him, her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You are not alone." Michael's eyes darted toward the dim corners where shadows still lingered, his breath uneven. "It waits for me in every silence. Marcus wants me broken." Elijah's calm voice echoed, "The storm rises before dawn. Stand firm." Daniel clenched his fists, his face caught between anger and fear, as if his own certainty was eroding. Grace sat nearby, her hands folded tightly, her tears mixing with faint hope. Michael closed his eyes, whispering to the silence, "If I fall, let it not be alone." Michael sat trembling near the cold wall, his eyes glazed as if seeing ghosts. His chest heaved, and with a whisper he said, "I never told anyone. But the night it happened, I ran." The room went silent, the others holding their breath. He pressed his palms into his face, words spilling out like poison. "I left them. My own family needed me, and I ran." Their screams still echo. His voice broke into sobs, shame consuming him. Sarah's hand hovered near his shoulder, her face pale with grief for him. Daniel frowned, but his mocking tone faded into silence. Grace covered her mouth as tears fell, the pain in his confession piercing her heart. Elijah's voice rumbled softly. "The voice called you because wounds unhealed still bleed." Michael choked out, "I am not worthy of being seen." Sarah turned away, her eyes filling with doubt for the first time. She gripped the window frame, whispering, "If he is called, then why do I feel so blind?" Her faith, steady for years, faltered under the weight of shadows. Michael lifted his tear-stained face, startled at her words. "You can't doubt now," he said, voice trembling. Sarah's hands clenched tight, wood creaking beneath her grip. "I speak of faith, but my heart feels empty," she admitted. Grace stepped forward, her voice fragile. "Even guides can stumble." Daniel crossed his arms, a smirk twitching at his lips, though unease glimmered in his eyes. Elijah's voice broke the silence, calm and unyielding. "Doubt does not erase faith. It is the soil where truth is tested." Sarah exhaled shakily, her face torn between despair and the will to stand again. The room darkened suddenly, the lantern sputtering out. A suffocating chill swept through, and Marcus' form emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked in darkness. His voice hissed, "You can be free of the pain. All it takes is surrender." Michael's breath caught, his body freezing in terror. Marcus's eyes glowed faintly, promising relief in exchange for obedience. Sarah stepped between them, but Marcus sneered. "You cannot shield him from his own hunger." Michael's lips trembled as he whispered, "If I listen, will it end?" Marcus smiled, cruel and knowing. "It will all fade, the guilt, the screams, the weight." Grace cried out, "Don't believe him?" Daniel stood frozen, torn between disbelief and fear. Elijah's eyes blazed with warning, his voice cutting sharp. "The shadow offers comfort that kills the soul." The air shook as Elijah stepped forward, his glow clashing with Marcus's darkness. "The storm rises for a purpose," Elijah declared, his voice like thunder. Michael clutched his chest, feeling torn apart between the two forces. Marcus snarled, "He is broken, he belongs to me." Elijah's hand lifted, light radiating brighter, filling the room with piercing warmth. "No, he is chosen," Elijah thundered. Michael cried out, "Chosen for what?" His voice cracked under the weight of fear and hope. Elijah's gaze pierced him. To face the storm, to bear what others cannot, and to rise in the place of ruin. Michael's head spun, the revelation both terrifying and stirring. Grace whispered through tears, "Then even brokenness can be holy." Marcus recoiled slightly, fury boiling in his eyes as shadows twisted in protest. The tension snapped into chaos as the group turned on one another. Daniel shouted, "This is insanity, we're feeding illusions." Sarah's voice rose sharp with desperation. "Faith is the only anchor left." Grace fell to her knees, sobbing, "I cannot bear the chains anymore." Michael stood trembling in the center, his eyes darting between Elijah's radiant form and Marcus's shadowy figure. "I cannot carry this weight," he cried, his voice breaking. Marcus's hiss slithered into the room. "Let go, and I will take it all away." Elijah's voice thundered in response, "Stand or fall into darkness." The room shook as lanterns rattled on their hooks, the air splitting with unbearable pressure. Michael dropped to his knees, torn between salvation and surrender, as silence swallowed his cry. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Michael stood in the center, his voice hoarse. "We're tearing apart." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Faith is our anchor." Daniel's sharp laugh echoed bitterly. "Faith? No. This is madness." His words sliced the fragile silence, shaking the others. Grace clutched her hands tightly, her voice trembling. "We need each other or we'll drown." Michael turned toward Daniel, desperation in his tone. "You saw the light, you felt it. Stop pretending." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger masking his fear. Elijah spoke, calm but firm. "Division feeds the shadow." Marcus's laughter slithered through the walls, mocking their chaos. Michael's shoulders sagged, his eyes heavy. "If we break now, we lose everything." Daniel paced the floor, his fists clenched. "Everything you believe is illusion. Reason is the only truth left." His voice cracked, betraying doubt. Sarah stepped forward, meeting his glare. "Reason without faith leaves us hollow." Daniel barked a laugh, though his eyes darted nervously to the shadows. Michael moved closer, his tone raw. You don't mock because you believe. You mock because you fear. Daniel froze, caught between anger and guilt. Grace's soft voice carried across the room. We are all afraid. Elijah's steady gaze locked on Daniel. Truth pierces even the heart that resists it most. Daniel's chest rose sharply, his mask cracking, though he turned away. The silence that followed was heavier than words. Grace stepped forward, her tears streaking down her face, yet her voice steadied. I know what it means to fall into the dark. I know the weight of ruin. She lifted her chin, defiance flickering in her eyes. But I will not give myself to it again. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his sneer sharp. You are still mine, he hissed. Grace shook her head, her voice firm. No, I was broken, but I am not bound. Sarah whispered, stand firm. Michael stared at her, awe mixing with sorrow. Daniel muttered, shaken, how can you face him? Grace's answer was fierce, because I already survived him once. Marcus's fury rippled through the room, shadows twisting violently. Michael collapsed onto the floor, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. I can't carry this, he whispered, his voice broken. Sarah knelt beside him, her hand resting on his trembling arm. You are not meant to carry it alone, she said gently. Her tone wrapped around him like a lifeline. Michael's chest rose sharply, his voice cracking. But chose me. The voice sees me. Sarah's eyes glistened, but her voice held firm. It sees you because you are not beyond redemption. Michael's face twisted with anguish. I abandoned them, my own family. Sarah cupped his face, whispering, and still mercy calls your name. Tears spilled from his eyes, and he buried his face into his hands. The room grew still, the storm pausing to listen. Michael lay restless, his head slumping against the wall as sleep pulled him unwillingly. Shadows curled around him, and in the dream he stood in a barren wasteland beneath a bruised sky. The voice thundered in his chest, sacrifice will be asked. He clutched his heart, fear crawling through him. What must I give? He cried. The wind howled, carrying whispers of chains breaking, of blood and mercy mingling. A figure cloaked in light stood across the desert, unreachable. Marcus's laughter echoed behind him, promising relief if he turned away. Michael fell to his knees, tears streaming. I cannot do this alone, he pleaded. The silence that followed carved into him like fire. He woke, gasping, his eyes wide, the dream's weight unshakable. The room plunged into darkness as a thunderous crack split the silence. The lanterns shattered, glass scattering across the floor. Michael gasped as shadows swarmed like living smoke, suffocating the air. Sarah clutched his arm, whispering urgently, stand firm. Grace collapsed to her knees, hands pressed in prayer. Daniel backed against the wall, his voice trembling. This isn't real. It can't be real. Marcus's form rose from the darkness, taller than before, his voice venomous. Your soul is mine. Michael's chest ached as fear clawed through him. Elijah stepped forward, his glow breaking the gloom. The storm has reached its peak. Michael whispered, shaking, then let it end tonight. Marcus advanced, shadows curling like chains from his hands. Michael stumbled backward, voice breaking. Why me? Why won't you let me go? Marcus's grin widened. Because you are already broken, and broken vessels shatter easiest. Sarah cried out, do not listen. Her voice trembled, yet her eyes blazed. Daniel's fists shook as he shouted, fight him, Michael. Elijah's voice thundered, stand against the lie. Grace raised her head, tears streaming, whispering, he cannot bind what mercy has claimed. Marcus hissed in fury, the shadows striking outward like whips. Michael staggered, his face torn between surrender and defiance. If I fall, he whispered, then let it be on my knees, not yours, Dodgehole. The floor quaked, splitting under their feet. Michael dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as Marcus's shadow wrapped around him. His cry echoed through the room. "I can't do this." Sarah knelt beside him, pressing her hand against his back. "You are stronger than you know." Grace's voice broke through sobs. "Mercy has not abandoned you." Daniel's eyes widened, the terror in him shifting into something new. He whispered, "It's real. All of it's real." Marcus's laughter boomed, echoing off the walls. Elijah raised his hand, light bursting outward in waves. "This is your test, Michael. Choose who you are." Michael lifted his head, sweat and tears on his face. "Then let my soul decide." Daniel stepped forward, his voice cracking but clear. "I mocked because I feared, but I cannot deny what I've seen." His trembling fists loosened as he looked at Michael. "You are not alone." Michael's eyes widened as Daniel stood between him and Marcus. Sarah's face lit with relief as she whispered, "Even the skeptic believes." Marcus snarled, "You betray reason." Daniel shouted back, "I embrace truth." Elijah's light pulsed brighter, feeding hope into the air. Grace clasped her hands tighter, sobbing, "Thank you." Michael felt a surge within him, fragile but fierce. His voice rose, "If even the doubter stands, then I will not fall." Marcus's growl shook the air, fury spilling from his shadowed form. The clash reached its peak, shadows and light colliding in violent waves. Michael stood, trembling but resolute, his voice thundering, "You will not own me." Marcus's roar split the air as darkness swarmed toward him. Elijah raised both hands, his light bursting outward like fire. Sarah shouted, "Stand firm, Michael." Grace's cry rose, "Hold on." Daniel's voice joined them, raw with belief, "You are more than your ruin." Michael's chest burned as the voice within him echoed once more, "You have been seen." With a final cry, Michael stepped forward, light pouring from his very being, shattering the shadows. Marcus screamed, his form dissolving into the void. The storm stilled, leaving silence heavy with awe. The storm ended in silence, the room still trembling with the memory of light. Michael collapsed, his chest heaving as if life had been poured back into him. Sarah rushed to his side, whispering, "You stood." Grace's hands shook as she touched the floor, eyes wide with awe. Daniel leaned heavily against the wall, whispering, "I saw it with my own eyes." Elijah's glow dimmed gently, his face calm. "The shadow is broken, but your journey is not yet complete." Michael raised his head, his voice ragged. "If I am seen, then let me live worthy of it." His words carried through the stillness, anchoring every soul in the room. Grace rose slowly, tears glistening on her cheeks, and whispered, "If he can be forgiven, then so can I." She placed her hand on her heart, her sobs breaking into relief. Michael reached for her hand weakly. "We are not what we were." Sarah's voice trembled as she said, "Grace is stronger than shame." Daniel muttered, "I never believed in mercy, but now I see it breathing in front of me." Elijah's calm presence filled the air. "Forgiveness is not earned, it is received." Grace smiled faintly through tears, and for the first time, her eyes lifted without fear. Michael whispered again, "Then we are free." Sarah's hands trembled as she sank to her knees, whispering, "Even I doubted, but I see now that the voice never left." Her eyes glistened as she lifted them to Michael. "You reminded me faith is not flawless. It is alive." Michael shook his head, weak but sincere. "You were my anchor when I drifted." Daniel stepped closer, hesitant but honest. "I mocked you, yet your faith held when mine crumbled." Grace clasped her hands, whispering, "We all needed to see it." Elijah's voice was low, steady. "Faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to move through it." The words struck each of them, soft but unshakable. Elijah's glow brightened once more, though his form seemed less solid now. His eyes met Michael's, with deep weight. "The voice that shook you was not meant to frighten, but to awaken." Michael's lips trembled as he whispered, Awaken to what? Elijah's voice carried like distant thunder. To the truth that your soul is seen, even in its darkest hour. Grace wept openly, covering her face. Daniel's voice cracked as he muttered, "Then we were never abandoned." Sarah whispered, "Always seen, always known." Michael's chest rose as a calm washed over him, the burden lightened. Elijah's form began to fade, leaving a final radiance behind. The light faded, leaving the room hushed and still. Michael stood slowly, his body weary, but his spirit burning anew. His voice was quiet but steady. The voice shook me, but it also freed me. Sarah stepped forward, smiling softly. "And now you walk in its strength." Grace whispered, "So do we all." Daniel exhaled heavily, whispering, "I believe." The silence stretched, filled with peace. Michael closed his eyes, whispering one final truth. To be seen is to be remade. The room stilled as the first rays of dawn pierced through the cracked window, bathing them all in golden light.